great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. This is Gary Williams. And Gary is a stalwart of the philosophy group and gives us a lot of very interesting talks. And the talk today is, Can an Atheist Know Anything? Which sounds very interesting. So with no more ado, could you welcome Gary in the usual way?
Well, thank you for that. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you for coming. I was a little concerned, I must say, that giving a talk on philosophy wouldn't have had much appeal. So I'm glad to see that you're all here, actually. I should say in beginning, too, that I have to thank Doug Jones for giving me the opportunity to present this talk. Unfortunately, Doug isn't feeling very well at all at the moment. And cannot be here today, so I'm sure we'll all send him our best wishes. And Chris, who just made the introduction, was Chris James, gave a presentation to the U3A philosophy group, which is still going strong, some time ago, and he began by saying, "My name is Chris James, and I'm an atheist." Well, I'm Gary Williams, and I'm an atheist too. Atheism means I believe in no gods and implies a belief in naturalism. Can you all hear me okay, by the way? Okay, fine, okay. No supernatural agents or agencies are operating in my world as far as I'm concerned. And I want to look at some possible implications of this view for the concepts of truth and knowledge. And by knowledge, I mean a justified true belief. That idea of knowledge goes back 2,500 years to Plato in ancient Greece. But for most purposes, it still serves today. So when I talk about knowledge, I'm talking about a justified true belief. And although I'm an atheist, that's okay. It's probably a call from Big G, I would think. Although I'm an atheist, I'm hoping to discomfort those atheists who are here today, and myself as well in a way. And I'm hoping that those atheists among us, and there are some that I know of, one in fact is a fully qualified atheist, that they'll have to rethink some of their and my non-beliefs. I've been an atheist since I was about 14, but I've always retained an interest in the relationship between science and religion and arguments for and against God. I've always been very interested in those topics. So, the interaction between science and religion then. I mean, there are two main stances you can take. Today, it's often claimed that because they address different aspects of reality, science with facts, religion with values, then they don't confront one another, and you can embrace both quite happily. And that view goes back, that's got a long pedigree as well. I mean, Galileo apparently said, the Bible teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. I just wish I could say things as clever as that. And more recent times, people like Stephen Jay Gould, a well-known popularizer of science, has written a book on the relationship between science and religion, saying because they address different aspects of our life, or as Gould says, they're non-overlapping magisteria, then we can happily embrace both. There's no problem in being a scientist and a theist. But more traditionally, people have seen a conflict between the two. In fact, funnily enough, just before I came out today, it had been delayed by the beast from the east, but a book that I ordered a while ago came. It's called Fact versus Faith by a guy called Jerry Coyne. Why Science and Religion are Incompatible is the subtitle. So that view is still very much to the fore. But it was first put forward by two Americans, this conflict thesis, John Draper and Andrew White, back in the middle of the late 19th century. You okay? That's okay, don't worry. So John Draper, for example, was a scientist and philosopher, had this to say: the history of science is not a mere record of isolated discourses, but a narrative of the conflict between two contending powers, the expansive force of the human intellect on the one side, and the compression arises from traditionary faith on the other. So he's quite unapologetic about the fact that he thought the two didn't go together. You couldn't be rationally a scientist and a theist at the same time. And I say there's another man called Andrew White in America said much the same thing. And today, of course, we've got the new atheists, if you like, people like Richard Dawkins. You'll have heard of these people, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and others, who are very vociferously anti-religion. Science works, science is the path to truth, and religion is false. And they're quite unapologetic in being very vehemently anti-religion. I wonder whether they could be as confident as they really are. Maybe, perhaps better be able to judge in a little while. But more recently, some theologians, I'll come on to them a bit later on, have argued rather differently. Rather than being defensive and saying, yeah, you can believe in religion as well, they've rather taken the initiative. They've gone on the attack. So, as an atheist, how did the universe, the world, life, us come about? If you're an atheist, you say, well, it came about naturally. I say naturalism is the idea that there are no supernatural entities. Now, a man called Alvin Plantinga, incredible name, Dutch origin, an American theologian, I'll come back to him later on, has argued strongly over the last 30 years or so that there is a deep concord, a deep coming together between science and theism, but a deep discord, in other words, a moving apart, a deep division between science and naturalism. So in other words, he's a theologian who's gone on the attack. He's saying science and theism go very well together, science and naturalism don't. Okay, the first thing then, why the claimed concord between science and theism? What are the main arguments that they actually go together very well? There's two main points I want to make. There are a number, but two in particular strike me as worthy of attention. The first is, the universe is certainly at minimum compatible with life. The second one, it seems clear that science and maths works very well in explaining the world. Why should that be? So I want to look at A first. This is the universe is certainly at minimum compatible with life. What's the issue here? Well, science explains the world via laws and a number of parameters, numbers that go into those laws, if you like. The values of those parameters are not deducible from the laws themselves, but are found by observation and experiment. And it seems that small, and sometimes very small changes to the values of those parameters would lead to a universe that's incompatible with life. And some of the conditions pertaining to the very early universe seem to be just right for the later universe to be compatible with life. This argument has got its own name. All these arguments have been given names. People like giving names to things. It's called the fine-tuning argument. It suggests that the universe has been finely tuned to be compatible with life, to bring life about. And there are a number of examples given. I mean, there are whole books written on this. But I just want to pick out a few of these parameters that people claim that if they were slightly different from the values they take, then life in the universe would not have been possible. And I could have chosen quite a few of them. First one I've chosen is the strength of gravity. Gravity is an incredibly weak force. So weak that I can easily raise my arm. So a tiny muscle in my arm overcomes the pull of gravity of the entire Earth pulling down on it. So gravity is a very weak force. If it was much weaker, significantly weaker, then no galaxies, stars, or planets would have formed in the early universe. And if it's only very slightly weaker, there would have been no hot stars, supernova, or heavy elements formed. We actually came, it's a commonplace to say today that we are made up of stardust, but we really are. The atoms in your body, or most of the important ones like carbon and oxygen and so on, were made in a supernova billions of years ago, spewed out into the universe when that supernova exploded. There wouldn't have been any supernovas if gravity had been very slightly weaker than it is. On the other hand, if it had been slightly stronger than it is, then only very small, short-lived stars would have been possible, and there wouldn't have been time for life to have evolved as it has. So the strength of gravity seems to be one parameter that seems to be this sort of Goldilocks formula, just right for life to have evolved. There's a force called the strong nuclear force. The strong nuclear force keeps the particles in an atomic nucleus together. These are the sort of protons and neutrons and so on. That strong nuclear force operates between them. And obviously it's of a certain strength. If it was about 50% stronger than it is, no hydrogen would have formed. It would all have burned up in the very early universe. No hydrogen, no water, likely no life. On the other hand, if it was much smaller than it is, then there would have been hardly any oxygen or carbon formed in stars, just by the physics of it. So if this force had been slightly different to what it is, again, it seems that life as we know it couldn't have arisen. And then there's this flavor of the month, this thing called dark energy, which used to be called the cosmological constant. This, if you like, relates to the energy in empty space, in the vacuum. Yeah, even the vacuum's got energy, it's got an empty space. In fact, the theory that physicists have put forward suggests that the energy of empty space should be about 1 with 120 noughts after it, greater than it is. It's been called the worst prediction ever made in science. But if that dark energy, as we understand it, was just a little bit different to what it is in strength, again, no galaxies would have formed, no stars, no life. And then when we look at, so those are things that are operative today, those are the strengths of things operative today. If we look at the early universe, the density of the early universe seems very, very close to what's called a critical value. In other words, if it had been less dense than it was, it would have expanded very rapidly and essentially blown itself apart again. No galaxies would have been able to form. And if it had been more dense, it would have recollapsed very quickly in on itself, giving it no time to have evolved life as we know it. The universe would have recollapsed within a few tens of millions of years. And not only that, the density had to be about right, but not only that, it had to be fairly uniform. If it was totally featureless, then no condensed bodies could have come about again. No stars, no galaxies again. On the other hand, if it had been, if the density differences had been too great, greater than they are, then again the early structures that were formed would have quickly collapsed into black holes. So that's just 4 or 5 parameters, if you like. There are many more of you, if you want to go on the internet or wherever, that suggests, certainly suggests to those of a particular mind, theists, that the universe has been designed for life. And of course, that argument in biology is a very old one indeed. It's the argument from design, if you like. When we look at the eye, for example, the eye seems such an incredible piece of work, if you like. How on earth could that have arisen by natural means? And until Darwin came along in the mid-19th century, there was no good answer to that question. It seemed clear that it had been designed by a designer. And although that argument of design in biology, most people today think that Darwin answered that fairly successfully and showing how things could have arisen naturally. I'll come on to that a bit later on. There are still people today, especially in America, who subscribe to a view called intelligent design, and they say that there are things in the world, biological facets, biological properties, that are so complicated they couldn't have arisen other than through purposeful design. So that's one of the arguments for this concord, if you like, between theism and science. They go together. Because without theism, without a designer, there could have been no life at all. And then the second argument that you often see put forward as to why these two belief systems, science and theism, go together, was the one between science and maths. It's long been a deep puzzle as to why mathematics in particular can apparently describe the world so well, with a system built up from small numbers, scribbles on paper, if you like. How is it that we can predict things that we see in the natural world? How is it that we can land a moon lander or a Saturn probe? How can we put it within meters of where it's intended to be simply by making calculations on a piece of paper or in a computer these days, but the principle's the same? How does mathematics work so well? Why does it work so well? It's not an obvious question, but there is no obvious answer either. Certainly not to me. And of course, the same goes to some extent for science. Why does science work? How is it that a small bipedal ape, if you like, can put forward theories and try to understand the basic functioning of the universe? In fact, many people have argued that science arose historically because of religious beliefs, because of theistic beliefs. Most early scientists were religious, and of course they were led to expect that the universe would be ordered because they believed in an orderer. They believed that it was a creator and a designer, and therefore they expected to see an ordered universe. One historical puzzle is why China never developed science. It developed technology. It is vastly ahead of the West in technology, gunpowder, shipbuilding, you name it. But it never developed a systematic science. And the argument first put forward by a man called Joseph Needham, who wrote an enormous number of books with his students on science and civilization in China, was that the Chinese didn't believe in a creator, God. They never expected to see order in the universe. So they never looked for it and they never found it. So what people like Plantinga and others claim is that there is evidence then for theism. God set up the universe so that we were able to understand it. He wanted us to be able to understand it. And without that, without the idea of a creator God, there's no reason why we should be able to understand it. Say, why is it that an ape that 3 million years ago was walking around the savannah in Africa can now understand quantum mechanics or whatever? There's no obvious answer to that, I don't think. Not an easy answer. But for a theist, it is. God wanted us to be able to understand the universe, and he set up things as such. So, a deep concord between science and theism. Okay, that's the first bit. That's the easy bit. More difficult arguments come when we have to ask, why the claimed discord between science and naturalism? What is it these people are arguing to suggest that science and naturalism don't go together? Well, a couple of arguments I want to put forward. The first one, if you look it up, it's where are we? There we go. It's now called the argument from reason. It was first put forward in a major way, in some detail, by somebody we'll all have heard of, called C.S. Lewis, known as Jack to all his friends, by the way, pretty well everyone. He was known as Jack because when he was young, he had a dog called Jaxie. And that poor little mutt was run over in one of the very earliest motor accidents in Ireland. And after that, Clive, as his real name was, said, I only want to be called Jaxie. Don't call me anything else. Well, they eventually persuaded him they could call him Jack, so he was called Jack by everyone after that. Anyway, C.S. Lewis, of course, wrote the Narnia books and so on and so forth. And he was also a Christian apologist. He wrote a lot of books on how he could believe in God in the world as it is. Great scholar. He was at Oxford and at Cambridge. Brilliant man. Wasn't religious when he was young. He had a conversion experience. Anyway, in his book Miracles, which he came out in 1947, and then he amended it later as a result of criticisms, he put forward an argument which has later been called the argument from reason. Now, remember, just to recap, naturalism, there's no supernatural beings, and almost all naturalists as well, and this includes me, and I think maybe some of the atheists in this room, subscribe to materialism. Materialism says the basic entities of the world are pieces of matter in motion, and the properties are described by science. So Lewis's argument starts off as follows. I take it slowly, it's not easy, but worth trying to understand. This is his early argument. It's very dry in here. Any genuinely naturalistic position, like me, like atheists among you, I guess, requires that all instances of explanation in terms of reasons can be further explained in terms of causes of non-purposive matter. I'll come back to this. So I'll just read that again. Any genuinely naturalistic position requires that all instances of explanation in terms of reasons, and we want to give our explanations in terms of reasons, can be further explained in terms of causes or of non-purposive matter moving around. And this matter, this physical world, is entirely accounted for by physical causes. There's no non-physical causes which operate on this level. Atheists must subscribe to that. The argument from reason says, if we are capable of rational inference, and naturalists themselves use this to defend their position, well, we all do, whatever we're trying to do. We attempt by logical arguments to persuade others to draw the same inference as ourselves. Whenever we enter into an argument, we try to persuade somebody, we're in the middle of a rational inference. Then the basic explanation for some events in the world must be given in terms of reasons, not in terms of the blind operation of nature obeying physical laws. So in other words, Lewis is saying, if you want to persuade somebody with a rational argument, then that argument must be given in terms of reasons, not causes. What are the difference? Well, we'll come on to that in just a minute. And he goes on. No belief is rationally inferred. And we want our beliefs to be rationally inferred, don't we? Because if they're not, then they could be anything. No belief is rationally inferred if it can be fully explained in terms of non-rational causes. This could be, say, a brain lesion, or if you're on drugs, or maybe some mad scientist has got control of your brain. If you can explain everything in terms of non-rational causes, then it's not rationally inferred. If naturalism is true, then all beliefs can be explained in terms of non-rational causes. In other words, by one physical state of the world bringing about a later physical state of the world. That's what naturalism pretty much implies. If that's true, all beliefs can be explained in terms of non-rational causes. So if naturalism is true, he says, no belief is rationally inferred. But naturalism itself depends on a rational inference. So you've got a contradiction, he says. Naturalism undercuts itself. It can't be true. It's got to be false. He had criticisms as a result of that argument, in particular by an Oxford scholar called Elizabeth Anscombe. And as a result of that, he then modified it slightly for the 1960 edition of his book Miracles. So he tried to explain further, perhaps more clearly, what he meant. He said, the word because is used in two types of connection: cause and effect, and the ground of an argument. So this is his book Miracles. I just want to read you a couple of pieces. The first one. Notice the two senses of the word because. We can say, grandfather is ill today because he ate lobster yesterday. We can also say, grandfather must be ill today because he hasn't got up yet. And we know he is an invariably early riser when he is well. In the first sentence, because indicates the relation of cause and effect. He ate a lobster, he's now got gut ache. The eating made him ill. In the second, it indicates the relation of what we call ground and consequent. In other words, grandfather's ill because he ate lobster. That's the cause of his illness. Or grandfather is ill because he's still in bed. The second case, that's evidence. The fact that he's still in bed is evidence that he's ill. And this grounds our belief in his illness. Now, naturalism, Lewis says that every event in nature is related to others by cause and effect. But when we're talking about rationally, in a rational argument, as I am now, I hope, then the premises in that argument must be related to the conclusion by the grounds we have for that conclusion. We must be able to say the reasons for our conclusion. That's the consequent, not the causes. In other words, it's not the rules of physics which apply to a rational argument, it's the rules of logic. And he finally says, cause and effect account of beliefs are often used to show the absence of a ground or a reason for our belief. So let me just read the second little bit I want to... This is how he finishes, well, essentially finishes his argument. To be caused is not to be proved. Wishful thinkings, prejudices, and the delusions of madness are all caused, but they are ungrounded. The mere existence of causes for a belief is popularly treated as raising a presumption that it is groundless, and the most popular way of discrediting a person's opinion is to explain them causally. You say that because you're a capitalist, or a hypochondriac, or a mere man, or only a woman. And my God, don't we hear that sort of argument used a lot today? The implication is that if causes fully account for a belief, whether you're a capitalist or this or that, or you've got a brain lesion or whatever, the implication is that if causes fully account for a belief, then since causes work inevitably, the belief would have to have arisen whether it had grounds or not. In other words, whether it was rational or not. We need not, it is felt, consider grounds for something which can be fully explained without them. So, causes is all that naturalism can countenance. It cannot give any grounds, he says, for beliefs. And that's what we want. We want to be able to ground our beliefs, to persuade other people to believe them, or to persuade ourselves to believe them. Therefore, naturalism cannot give rational inferences. But as he said earlier, naturalism is itself a rational inference. We naturalists wish, don't we, to give reasons for our beliefs. But we can't if naturalism is true, argues Lewis. So we've got a problem. Now, I said that C.S. Lewis was the one who's known for that argument. But interestingly, I found more recently that he was preempted in that argument by another man you will have heard of in a different context. And that's Arthur Balfour, who was, as you were aware, a Conservative Prime Minister for a few years at the beginning of the 20th century. But he's also an academic. In fact, he's far better as an academic than as a Prime Minister. And he wrote a couple of books, in particular, that I've been interested in. One, when the Conservatives were in opposition in 1892 to 1895, he had time to write a book which he called The Foundations of Belief. And then later, after the Tories were kicked out again, he gave what's called the Gifford Lectures, which is still going, in Scottish universities. Lord Gifford, in his will, allowed for a series of lectures to be given on topics related to natural theology. And Balfour gave one in 1913, the lectures, 7 of them, and they were collected into a book called Theism and Humanism, Gifford Lectures 1914, it says. And I'll just read you a few things that Balfour had to say about these topics. So this is 50 years or so, 40 years or so before C.S. Lewis. Let's see if I can... On the naturalistic theory of the world, count me in, all such ambitions are vain. And by ambitions, he means coming to the truth or knowledge. All such ambitions are vain. It is abundantly evident that however important be the part which reason plays among the immediate antecedents of our beliefs, there are no beliefs which do not trace back their origin to causes which are wholly irrational. Approximately, these beliefs may take rank as logical conclusions. Ultimately, they are without exception rooted in matter and motion, naturalism. The rational order is but a graft upon the causal order, and if naturalism be true, the causal order is blind. So he's pretty much saying exactly what Lewis said 40 or 50 years later. And again, briefly, I'll read this one. I like the last sentence. It's very, very nice. Blah, blah, blah. He's talking about physiological changes in the brain now. These, again, are part of the general stream of physical happenings, which in themselves have nothing rational about them. follow up this stream but a little further, and every trace not only of mind but of life is completely lost, and we are left face to face with unthinking matter and its purposeless movements. Logical inference is thus no more than the reasoned termination of an unreasoning process. Scratch an argument and you find a cause. I think that last line is quite beautiful. It's summing up exactly the sort of arguments we're talking about here. Scratch an argument and you find a cause. And this is from his other book, Foundations of Belief. Okay, and then we'll move on. Whatever be the part played by reason among the proximate causes of belief, among the ultimate causes it plays, according to science, no part at all. On the naturalistic hypothesis, the whole premises of knowledge are clearly due to the blind operation of material causes, and in the last resort, to these alone. On that hypothesis, we no more possess free reason than we possess free will. All our conclusions are the inevitable product of forces which are quite alien to reason. So you can see the problem, I think, for a naturalist. If these sorts of arguments go through, then naturalism undercuts itself. It cannot account for rational or reasoned beliefs. Right, okay. So I don't want to go into the sort of second theme of the argument, if you like. So that's one argument. It's got the argument from reason, as I say. It's quite old, as you can tell. It's never been refuted. There are a number of books which attempt to refute Lewis's position. I've read a couple of them, and none of them seem to be without their own problems. So that's the first argument from reason. It says naturalism undercuts itself because it cannot countenance rational inference. Second argument is related to that, but again, we say, how did the world, life, us come about? Well, naturalism rejects any creation by gods, and it claims, of course, that life arose via evolution, with the primary mechanism being natural selection. That's obviously as first argued for by Charles Darwin, as I'm sure you're aware. Briefly, Darwin's theory said the following. All animals, plants as well, produce far more offspring than can survive to adulthood and reproduce themselves. The deaths occur via environmental conditions, the beast from the east or whatever, predation, accidents, and so on. That insight, that most animals die without reproducing, Darwin famously took from his reading of Thomas Malthus, who'd written a book or a tract on population. Darwin said he read him for amusement in late 1838. I don't think anyone would read Malthus for amusement, but anyway. And that gave him a theory by which to work. Up until then, he didn't have a good mechanism to explain evolution. It was after reading Malthus, he said, that he had a theory by which to work. And Malthus basically had written that, as regards humans, that population growth would always outstrip food production, and so poverty would always be amongst us. Poverty would always be part of the human condition. That was Malthus's rather bleak view of the human condition, if you like. So that was the first strand of Darwin's argument. Secondly, all species show significant variability in its members. And this isn't just variation about an ideal type. People always knew that species varied amongst themselves, but they thought it was an ideal type, an ideal archetype created by God, and the variation was just around that ideal archetype. I mean, that was well known. Darwin himself had confirmed the fact that species vary enormously. During an 8-year study of barnacles, 8-year study of barnacles, 4 volumes. He started off by looking at one barnacle that he picked up on his travels on the Beagle, and then ended up he looked at every species of living and fossil barnacle, and those books are still used by scholars today. Anyway, thirdly, such variations between the members of a species are heritable. Offspring tend to have the same traits, physical and behavioral, as their parents. That also was well known. Darwin used the knowledge of animal breeders to confirm it. I mean, animal breeders obviously knew themselves that the qualities of the stock that they rose was related to the quality of the stock of the parents and so on. That was well known. And in fact, Darwin started off his book, The Origin of Species, with a chapter on artificial selection and pigeons in particular. He was a great pigeon fancier. The whole house apparently smelled of pigeons being boiled and so on. So Darwin argued then that changes arise in individual members of a species, and some of these changes would be beneficial in the struggle for survival that inevitably followed from the fact that most members would die before reproducing themselves. These changes, being heritable, would pass to the descendants of the better adapted individuals so that the change would persist and come to characterize the species in future. And through time, and even then, even in the 1850s, people no longer believed, hardly anyone believed, that the world was just 6,000 years old anymore. People knew that the world was millions of years old, right from the days of James Hutton and so on, back in the late 18th century. So there was no problem in having time on your side, as it were. Through time, those changes would accumulate and lead to the formation of new species. And it was that theory Darwin called natural selection. It's often called survival of the fittest today. Survival of the fittest was a term that Herbert Spencer coined in 1864, and it stuck. It is quite a felicitous term, I guess, survival of the fittest. And it's worth noting, just in passing really, that Darwin argued that the changes that took place in these animals and plants, the changes that occurred were random. Random in the sense of having no preferred effect on the adaptiveness of the individuals. These changes were not guided in any way. And it was this feature of Darwin's theory that proved incendiary following the publication of his book. It wasn't the fact that he was saying that life had evolved was incendiary. No. People had known about evolution for many years. Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had put forward a theory of evolution 60 years before the origin. Lamarck in France. Vestiges of Creation had been published in Britain in 1844 to great kerfuffle. So evolution was quite well accepted. It was the fact that it was unguided that meant that most theists, most believers in God, couldn't accept that. They couldn't accept that evolution was unguided. They wanted it to be preordained. That's why Darwin and his ideas were so incendiary in the 1860s and so on. Okay, that's a bit of an aside, really. Anyway, so what? Well, from the theory of natural selection, it follows that the only ultimate purpose of organisms brought into being by natural selection is to reproduce oneself. If an attribute does not enhance this ability, it cannot be an adaptation which has arisen via natural selection. And this is the only theory that naturalists have available to us. So what follows from that then? Well, as naturalists, we anticipate, believe that our brain, our cognitive system, has evolved to maximize our survival and reproduction. Nothing else. fundamentally, nothing else. But then what the hell has that got to do with truth or knowledge? I mean, Darwin himself, towards the end of his life, wrote a letter just less than a year before he died, in fact. And he said this: "But then with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?" So he was puzzled. Why should our mind, if you like, be so different to everything else? Nothing else should be too bothered with truth as such. How come we alone have a grasp of it? And again, I'd just like to go back to our old friend Balfour, because he had something to say about this as well. I say he was absolutely wasted as a Prime Minister. He stuck to philosophy, as people should do. We'd have all been better off. We never had the Balfour Declaration either, probably. Anyway, let's get into politics. This is what Balfour had to say. "We are to suppose, crikey, that powers which were evolved in primitive man and his animal progenitors, in order that they might kill with success and marry in security, are on that account fitted to explore the secrets of the universe. We are to suppose that the fundamental beliefs on which these powers of reasoning are to be exercised reflect with sufficient precision remote aspects of reality, though they were produced in the main by physiological processes which date from a state of development when the only curiosities which are to be satisfied were those of fear and hunger. To say that instruments of research constructed solely for uses like these cannot be expected to supply us with a metaphysic or a theology is to say far too little. They cannot be expected to give us any general view, even of the phenomenal world, or to do more than guide us in comparative safety from the satisfaction of one useful appetite to the satisfaction of another." In other words, he's saying that how come our brain has evolved to know the truths of theology or metaphysics or whatever? Why should it have? There's no reason to expect it to be like that. Manifestly, we cannot indulge ourselves in reflections upon the limits of the knowable without using our intellect for a purpose never contemplated by selection. So he's specifically talking about natural selection now. "I do not allege that our intellect is therefore unequal to the task. I only say that if it be indeed equal to it, we are in the presence of a very surprising coincidence. Why should faculties designed only to help primitive man or his animal progenitors successfully to breed and feed be fitted to solve philosophic problems so useless and so remote?" I wouldn't agree with him with that, but anyway. "Why indeed do such problems occur to us? Why do we long for their solution? Indeed, why do we? If we just got a brain that was evolved, designed, if you like, to use that word, to get us from one generation to the next, why would we expect to be able to understand, if you like, the deepest questions of the universe? Good question, isn't it? Okay. So lastly, I don't know what we're doing for time here. This is the most recent argument given to suggest that naturalism and science are incompatible, basically. It's along the lines of that evolutionary argument I've just explained. This is the one that was put forward about 30 years ago, and it's still argued strongly for today by a man called Alvin Plantinga. As I say, he's an American professor of theology. In fact, he's generally considered to be the greatest philosopher of theology alive today. He's a Protestant, Dutch extraction, blah, blah, blah. And interestingly, he also gave the Gifford Lectures in 2004, in fact. And he also won the Templeton Prize, I think it was last year. Templeton Prize is a prize of $1 million given by the Templeton Foundation to those people who've made the most significant contributions to understanding of science and religion and how they react, how they relate to each other. Sorry about my voice going a bit. Plantinga's argument is it's not easy. None of his writings are easy. But on the basis of no pain, no gain, I'll have a go at it for the next 5 or 10 minutes before I finish. So this is his argument. Naturalism implies evolution. Yeah, that's fair enough. And that implies adaptive behaviours. That's fair enough, I think. We've just seen that it doesn't necessarily imply true beliefs. So Plantinga says that the reliability of our faculties, whether we can rely on our senses, if you like, or our brain, the reliability of our faculties, given naturalism and evolution, is low. The probability of the reliability of our faculties, given naturalism, okay, I'm a naturalist, I believe in evolution, given that, then the reliability of our faculties is likely to be low. We'll come on to see why he says that in a minute. But so if you believe that argument, if a subject accepts naturalism and evolution, as atheists pretty well must do, as far as I can see, and she has a defeater, an argument that undercuts another, if you like, for a belief in a high value of the reliability of your senses. She accepts what Plantinga said up to now, that she cannot believe that our faculties are highly reliable. And if the naturalist comes to believe that, then she has a defeater for all of the beliefs, one of which is naturalism and evolution. So again, naturalism is self-refuting. But of course, why should we accept that the reliability of our faculties, given naturalism and evolution, is low? And that's really the nub of Plantinga's argument. And the way he answers it is to ask us to consider the relationship between beliefs and behaviours. And the way he analyses it, he looks at 4 possible relationships between belief and behaviour. The first one is, and there's no others, just those 4 according to Plantinga. Beliefs do not cause behaviours. In this case, beliefs function like the sound of the heart, say, or the whistle of a train, as it used to be. This is an idea called epiphenomenalism. All it means is that the beat of my heart, you can hear my heart beating, I hope, but that beat, that sound that it makes, has got no functional significance. What's important about my heart is it works like a pump. The fact that it makes a noise when it does it's of no significance whatsoever. Just like the whistle of a train. Well, it used to whistle, but the whistle itself had no functional significance. The train could still have gone if there was no whistle, of course. So this is the same sort of thing. He's saying beliefs do not cause behaviours. We have beliefs, but they don't cause anything. If they don't cause anything, then beliefs are invisible to selection. And we wouldn't expect our faculties to be reliable. Why would we? If all this is invisible to selection, and selection is what's going on there, There is no reason on earth to think that our faculties would be reliable in those situations. The second category, if you like, or the second relationship, I should say, between beliefs and behavior is a tricky one. Beliefs, he says, do cause behavior, but not by virtue of their content. And what the hell does he mean by that? Well, what he's saying is that a belief is encapsulated, it is basically a neurophysiological circuit in your brain. That's what a belief is. It's constituted by a neurophysiological process in your brain. And some people believe that that's all there is. So that the belief, although it causes behavior, it doesn't cause it because of any of its content. It's all that's going on in your brain is the neurophysiology. There's no remainder. That's all there is. I think that's cuckoo. I'll read you. I'll be finishing in just a few minutes by reading another quotation by one of the greatest neuroanatomists alive today. So he's saying beliefs do cause behavior, but not by virtue of their content. The contents of no. It's all the neurophysiology. That's all that matters. Again, in that case, there's no reason to believe that our faculties have any reliability at all, because they're not doing any work. The work is all being done by the neurophysiology. Thirdly, he says belief perhaps causes maladaptive behaviors, causes behaviors that are bad for us. Well, we wouldn't want such beliefs as that. We'd be better off, if you like, or fitter without them. So in this case, the reliability of our faculties should certainly be low. And then finally, the one that on the face of it sounds most promising, he says, beliefs do cause adaptive behaviors. In other words, beliefs cause behaviors that are good for us. Well, he's not having that, though. He's not giving up. What he says now is a behavior is caused by a belief and a desire acting together. So any behavior that you exhibit, behind it lies a belief and a desire. Without the desire, there's no reason to, even if you've got a belief, there's no reason to carry out the behavior. There must be a desire as well. And for any action, there will be many belief-desire combinations that could produce that action, he says. And in many combinations, the belief itself will be false. The example he gives is typical of philosophers. Philosophers often give absolutely ridiculous examples. And they're chosen to be ridiculous because all they're interested in is the fundamental logic of the situation. They don't want you being swayed by any real-world application of these things. They want you to dispense with all of that. So the example he gives is, again, 3 million years ago, if you like, on the African savannah, a hominid is fleeing a lion. Okay, that's fine. We would flee from a lion, wouldn't we? But Plantinga says, perhaps this hominid very much likes the idea of being eaten by a lion, that is. But when she sees a lion, she always runs away because she thinks it unlikely the lion she sees is hungry and will eat her. Now, that's of course a ridiculous example. But what he's suggesting is that for any behavior then, because it's constituted by both a belief and a desire, the belief doesn't always have to be true. The belief doesn't be true. The desire comes into it as well. And as I say, if you think that's crazy, as I certainly did when I read it first, listen to this. This is a lady called Pat Churchland, who's one of the husband, Paul Churchland, is also a neuroanatomist as well. They work together, and they're probably the best, or some of the best known neuroanatomists in the world. And she says this: boiled down to essentials, a nervous system enables the organism to succeed in feeding, fleeing, fighting, and, joke coming up, reproducing. The principal chore of the nervous system is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Truth or knowledge, whatever that is, takes the hindmost. So this is a world-famous scientist saying that, yeah, all of this, nothing to do with truth and knowledge at all. As long as your behavior is set up so that you act to survive and reproduce, whether your belief is true or not is totally beside the point. So Plantinga's conclusion then is that however you analyze the relationship between beliefs and behaviors, all of them lead to situations in which the reliability of our faculties is low. So for an atheist then, committed as we are to naturalism and evolution, R is always low. The reliability of our faculties is always low. And since knowledge is justified through belief, we cannot know anything. There we are. Oh, pretty good, pretty good.
Well, thank you, Gary. Talk about thought-provoking. Are there any questions?
I'm a Christian and drowning, I think, clutching at straws. And one straw I've always clutched at in relation to Darwin is, I think he was a French theologian who said, God makes things make themselves. And that's my little straw I clutched to. That he lit the touch paper, and the so elegant, beautiful theme of evolution, which I love, is a God-made thing, which is obviously opposite to what Darwin thought.
Yeah, I mean, one of Darwin's great buddies after he wrote The Origin was Charles Kingsley, who wrote The Water Babies, and he was also a professor at Oxford, in fact. And Kingsley believed just that. Kingsley believed in evolution. He took on board Darwin's ideas, most of them. But he believed, that behind it there was this creator God, benevolent creator God. And also Darwin's, Darwin's ideas in America caught on very quickly. And to a large extent, that was due to a man called Asa Gray, who was an American botanist who visited Darwin a number of times. And his view was exactly the same, that evolution was correct, but nevertheless behind it there was a direction, and that direction was obviously God-given. And Darwin wouldn't have that. I mean, Darwin, famous letter to Gray wrote about, the idea that when you saw a cat play with a mouse, for example, or the hideous cruelties in nature, he could see no evidence of benevolent design in nature. That was Darwin's argument. But that type of argument, that I'll have evolution and my cake as well, and sort of doing a bit of a Boris Johnson. I'll have evolution, but I'll keep design as well, was very common, and it's still common today. There are lots of people who, maybe you, Graham, yourself, believe that evolution is happening, but there is a benevolent mind behind it. God, my throat's really, it's just going here. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Can you get a mic in there? Yeah, I know.
Hello there, hi. By dint of that, can we therefore not believe anything?
Well, it seems
or is the unreliability of our senses such that we just cannot know, whether we're atheists or religious people or whatever description we hold, we cannot know anything? never mind being an atheist.
Well, you do well in our philosophy class. I mean,
And what
that's-
about the notion of evidence?
That's the
and
sort
the
of-
relationship between cause and effect, and how effect and cause can be one and the same thing? What
Yeah.
about discussions around
well,
that?
of course.
I mean, I can make a claim now that, I can make a claim that I believe something, but whether whether people agree with my notion that,
Yeah.
that in this, that the world is created by an ape, say, for instance. I might believe that wholeheartedly, but I also might be suffering from paranoid schizophrenia at
Well,
the same time.
that's the point, isn't it? That line when you finish with, then you might be suffering from something. That's exactly right. I mean, there are cases of people who have, let's say, a personality change, and they've been found to have a tumour, for example, in their brain. And they feel compelled to behave in a certain way, apparently because of that tumour. Now, I would argue that we're all in the situation of having a tumour in the brain in that sense. Why believe that just because a tumour can affect your behaviour, why not believe that just the brain that you've got as it is forces you down a particular route? Fundamentally, if you're a naturalist and a materialist and a determinist, you think, well, the state of your brain now is dependent on the state of the brain and the rest of the world as it was some little time ago. There's no reason to believe there's any rationality involved there. The world has just moved from one state to another. Where's the rationality there? That's the problem I have. That's the problem any atheist should have, I think. And there are people arguing against this, of course, obviously. Maybe I'll just finish with this. This is from Plantinga's book. Well, he's written many of them. And it's called Where the Conflict Really Lies. I mean, as far as he's concerned, the conflict doesn't lie between science and religion. As I've said, it lies between science and naturalism. Because for Plantinga and others like him, naturalism implies irrationality. It undercuts itself, so science itself cannot operate. But this is the way Plantinga approaches it. Maybe it'll help, I don't know. Isn't it just obvious that true beliefs will facilitate adaptive action? Isn't it obvious, more generally, that true beliefs are more likely to be successful than false beliefs? Of course, like everyone else, I believe that our cognitive faculties are for the most part reliable, and that true beliefs are more likely to issue in successful action than false. But that's not the question. The question is what things would be like if naturalism and evolution were true. And for me, they are. And for other atheists, I assume they're true. And in this context, we can't just assume, of course, that if naturalism and evolution, naturalism including materialism, were true, then things would still be the way they are. That is, we can't assume that if materialism were true, it would still be the case that true beliefs are more likely to cause successful action than false beliefs. And in fact, if materialism were true, it would be unlikely that true beliefs mostly cause successful action and false beliefs unsuccessful action. And he's quite right. He's quite right. Why suppose that in a materialist, determinist world, that our beliefs, which are just a state of the brain that has arisen because of an earlier state of the brain in the world, why suppose that there's any rationality involved in that process? Where does rationality, where does truth, where does knowledge come from? How does it enter the world? That's the problem I have. That's the problem any thinking atheist should have. And there are good arguments. I've just given one side of the picture there. Just see if... I don't know if anyone else wants to make any comments, Chris.
Just one thing, Gary. Well, you may just be answering on something here. Given that so much emphasis is placed entirely on survival, where does kindness and consideration for others come into the formula?
That's a good question. I mean, until about the 1960s, the problem of... I'll come back. The problem of altruism, the idea that you act for the benefit of another animal, was a major headache for evolution. I mean, Darwin himself had problems with the social insects, for example. How do the social insects evolve, you know? They give their lives for other insects. How could that be in a world of dog eat dog? How could, as you say, kindness evolve in a world like that? Right, nature red in tooth and claw. And since the 1960s, I mean, there's been a huge betterment in our understanding of evolution. In particular, the idea of at least one of the ideas, it's called kin selection. In other words, pretty much as it says, your genes, if you like, not just in your body, John, they are in your children's bodies and your cousins' bodies. So it's in your interest very often to help those other individuals, because by doing that, you will be helping their genetic legacy as well. Now, that's a pretty crude, materialistic way of looking at it. And of course, its most popular exposure was in The Selfish Gene, which Richard Dawkins wrote in 1976. This is all about the gene's eye view of evolution, if you like. I think he's always sad that he called it the selfish gene after that, because people really thought genes were selfish. I mean, as if, you know, it's rather a silly thing. It's like pretending a biscuit could be in favour of Brexit or something. I mean, the two things just don't go together. But the point he was making was that you could see evolution, altruism included, kindness included, from a gene-centric view. It paid genes, if you like, it's a crude gene speak, to be kind in certain situations. If you're surrounded by kin, it pays to be kind. And the other thing is, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This is a sort of reciprocal altruism. You know, I'm altruistic to you, you're altruistic to me. You know, that could pay as well. Especially if you amongst a small group of people who know each other and will be interacting many times in the future. It pays to be the good guy rather than the bad guy who gets, you know, left on the ice floe sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's understood how altruism, kindness can evolve.
Thank you, Gary, for an inspiring talk, as usual. As a self-certified atheist...
I did mention at the beginning.
I mean, self-certified because clearly there is no authority that could give qualifications for being an atheist. So, one of the things that puzzles me is this business of continuing to live. If we accept, for example, that life is basically meaningless and that we have we are here simply in order to reproduce, some successfully, some not, and then die, and we have to invent, as it were, a purpose to continue to be alive. And one of the things that one uses to be able to do this is, of course, to attach oneself to a belief system which has no evidence base. So we've got the Ten Commandments, we've got the schizophrenies of the Quran and so on and so forth, if anybody's ever read it. I mean, it's just complete rubbish. And the Ten Commandments are, well...
You're not going to get all controversial, there's no Charles.
Well, no, these things are self-evidently true. There's no problem with this. I'm just wondering, as an atheist, how do you create a moral system in which you find it amenable and not awkward to carry on living? I suppose is the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer it, really. So you're not qualified to. How do you where does morality come from in this world? Yeah, exactly. I mean, certainly I don't think you could subscribe to... No, that's probably not true. I was going to say you can't subscribe to absolute morals. but I'm not even sure that's true. Yeah, where does morality come from? If it isn't God-given, and of course this was always one of the worries that, in fact, I became an atheist when I was about 14, and the first thing my mother said to me was, well, you know, what about your conscience? How are you going to behave? As if overnight I would turn into sort of like Jack the Ripper or something. But I mean, fundamentally, I mean, where does morality come from in a godless universe, which fundamentally is just bits of matter moving around? Well, I don't have a good answer to that, but all I would say is that morality is a system put in place by people, for people, and therefore it should, you know, be beneficial. I profound the utilitarian view, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, is crude, and it leads to horrible paradoxes in some places, but on the whole, it's probably as good as we can get. If you live your life trying to minimize pain and maximize pleasure without being totally hedonistic, I mean, what else can you do? What else? How can you better that system? I'm not entirely sure. That's as much as I can say there, Chris. I offer no profound wisdom there.
I think we got time for. We could go on all afternoon. I think we've got time for one more question. So.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it is. I mean, we couldn't live, could we, in an amoral universe? I mean, if you come to the philosophy class, there's the middle of an. There's more. We're in the middle of an excellent series on continental, if you like, philosophy. And I mean, that is a philosophy of the absurd in some sense. Absurd in the sense of, as Charles was just saying, that without God, if it is just matter moving around, isn't it all at the bottom then just absurd? Isn't life just meaningless? People say to Richard Dawkins, or used to say to him, Richard, why do you get up in the morning? As if they thought because he didn't believe in God, because there was no ultimate meaning other than survival, then his life was just valueless. And there's no, of course, when we say meaning for most of us, most of the time, it's about the small meanings that we make for ourselves. Our kids, are they well off? Shall I go for another job? How about a nice meal tomorrow night? The tiny things of life are the things that give it meaning and pleasure. I think looking for anything ultimate, as a non-religious person, I can't do that. There's nothing behind it all. But that doesn't mean I find life meaningless or even absurd. I mean, some people do, but I don't. Sorry, you'll have to either shout up or...
Who's got the mic? You described the universe as it has evolved, Gary.
Oh, sorry. So you know.
Yeah. And the atoms and molecules that evolved from that via stars, etc.
Right.
And then via those atoms and molecules, how life came about in whatever state. It was some sort of a mix or heating or pressure or whatever. And every one of us here is directly descended to that first life form. We can trace our ancestry right back to that.
Yeah.
And then we say, right, there's a maker, a designer, and so on. Well, it's taken him a hell of a long time to get to us, hasn't it?
He has.
And it's gone through various different forms with mass extinctions. And I think if any other universe of a similar nature was formed, maybe life as we know it, to quote Spock or whatever it was, we wouldn't necessarily have formed. It's just a matter of chances, so many chances that have come to human beings. And we're the only people who have been able to think and let the universe know that we know it exists. Otherwise, right. What's the purpose of life, of the universe?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think. Ultimately, I don't think there is. I mean, if we hadn't arisen, and it may well be that we're the only sentient beings in the universe. Maybe we're not, but maybe we are. So say we were to be wiped out by a pandemic or whatever, or would the universe then be somehow, because we are the only things because it's still meaning and so on into the universe would somehow suffer as a result of that? Well, no, of course it wouldn't. It would go on just as it's gone on for billions of years. I mean, Stephen Gould, who I mentioned earlier on briefly, once wrote that to a first approximation, life is bacteria. And of course, what he meant by that is that bacteria were the only life forms for 2 or 3 billion years. And even today, you've got more bacteria in your body than you've got human cells. So, looking at it from an outsider perspective, or another example, when Haldane, who was a great biochemist, biophysicist, was asked what he thought creation showed about God, about the properties of God. He said he must have had a profound longing for beetles, because there's one species of humans, and about, I don't know, whatever the latest is, 500,000 species of beetles. So if you're looking at the universe and trying to extract a God out of that, as far as Haldane was concerned, he looked like a beetle. And for Gould, you'd probably look like a bacteria, because I say bacteria have been around for 4 billion years. That's 1,000 times longer than we have. And there's lots more of them. And some of them are plaguing my throat at the moment, I think, and winning. So, I mean, yeah, if you look to the world and try to extract what that tells you about God, as Graham was alluded to perhaps earlier on, and people like Kingsley and Asa Gray, I just don't see it. I just don't see that at all. I mean, to me, you can look to nature and you can pretty well take out of it what you like. Certainly the idea that you could take out a particular God, a particular creator God with particular properties, I think is quite ridiculous. But that's because I'm an atheist. But as you can see, I don't think that atheists, I mean, the new atheists that we have today are so vociferous, so vehement, so clear that they're right. But I don't think they've looked at the arguments in the round, really. And they've just assumed that religion, by its very nature, as Charles would say, is absurd. You don't need to offer an argument to knock it down. It's just clearly ridiculous in its own right. I don't think that's true. I don't believe in it. I mean, to me, it just seems wrong that there is such a thing as a God. I wouldn't want there to be a God. I wouldn't want there to be someone who we are beholden to. But that's just a sort of petty human view of things. Maybe he couldn't give a tuppeny toss what I think, or she. But all I'm saying is that I think there are arguments, I put one or two forward today, that should make any atheist think that, their position isn't unassailable either, and that a well-read theist could give them a run for their money. It isn't just obvious to me that theism is wrong.
I'm fine. I'd like to know why you don't think such religious perspectives are absurd.
Why I think they're absurd?
Why do you entertain that notion that they're not absurd?
Okay. Well, my own belief, I mean, I didn't want to be really talking about my own beliefs. I don't think it's very particularly important. But for what it's worth, I would be prepared to countenance some sort of a creator, if you like, but certainly not a god of any particular religion. I think that's quite ridiculous, the idea that even if from some of these arguments and other arguments of design or whatever, you come to the view that it's best explained by a creator, then to move from that to any particular version of that, whether it's the god of the Israelites or the god of Muslims or whatever, I think that is absurd, because I mean, the gap, the jump from a creator to one who has particular views on our sexual habits, or whether we eat fish on a particular day of the week, is just so crazy as not to be worth thinking about, or not thinking about sensibly anyway. But the idea of a creator, I don't see the need for one. I think there are arguments against what I put forward. Very good arguments. But I don't think they knock it down. I don't think it's an obvious position that it can be knocked over quite easily.
Well, thank you, Gary. We could go on for...
Have we got 1 more minute? The gentleman's just been... He's had his hand up a few times.
Just
well, I think...
We finished, are we?
We could go on. This is
Okay.
so fascinating, to be honest. I think we could go on for quite a while yet. You will be around for coffee, will you? Or
Yeah,
tea?
around for coffee.
So
Yeah.
we've got tea and coffee in the back. So if you want to have a chat with Gary, you've got a burning question, then he is here for a little while yet. This is... Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. It's unfortunately not free. It's £1 a cup. So, well, it should be coffee. I don't see any. So we will chase that up now. Gary, thank you very, very much. It was absolutely fascinating. I think what it does demonstrate is this is an argument which is not straightforward, and it's not black and white, and one way or the other. And there is enough to keep us going here for years, I think. So could you, if you're very interested in this sort of thing, come along to the philosophy group. We've been, it's one of the least successful groups we've got. We've been arguing for 20 years. We haven't come to a conclusion on anything yet. Anyway, thank you very much, Gary. Could you show your appreciation of the usual?